As we know, the Colorado River is in a 2-year drought, which has basically brought lake mead to its lowest level since 1930. And if I could get you to concentrate on what kinds of changes to laws, norms, institutions, perhaps as well as infrastructure that will be needed to adapt to this new normal, which is the drought. So, the water rights system and that, if you could address.
Thank you. Yes, California is in an unprecedented drought, which started before we could finish our evaluation of how well we responded to the previous unprecedented drought. What we are seeing is that climate change is exacerbating problems that we had not adequately addressed before. This graphic is intended to show just how variable the level of precipitation is in California. The lighter sort of, pink colors show areas of the country with relatively little variation in precipitation, with the darker colors, the green, the violet, the black, showing the areas with the greatest variation from year to year. And you can see California and the arid West have much more variability from year to year than the rest of the United States. And California is the most extreme in the variation from year to year. Rivers do not flow in averages, but in extremes. An example of the extremes we're now facing is this year in Sacramento, where I live, we had a record 222 days without measurable precipitation. That was broken about a week ago when we got 1/100 of an inch of rain in a storm. Now in the current storm, we have received a new record, 5.5 inches in 24 hours. So we have a flooding in the middle of a drought. That 5.5 inches, more like 10 or 15 in the mountains, is not nearly enough to get us out of the drought. What is happening, next slide please, is that the precipitation levels in each of the droughts are not unprecedented. But what we're seeing with each successive drought is the temperatures are higher. And when temperatures are higher, then the vegetation, the natural vegetation takes up more water, the crops need more water, some of the snow and evaporates without ever reaching the rivers, so that the amount of water actually available for diversion for use or for environmental uses is less with each drought because it's hotter. The next slide shows just how extreme the droughts are, where much of California and the Colorado River Basin is in more than extreme drought. It's listed as exceptional drought. And I think we can finish the slides now. What I said, that climate change is exacerbating basically our failure to adequately deal with previous droughts, and now they're getting worse. There are at least 4 problems, deficiencies in how we've been dealing with the system. First of all, we have a water right system that's intended to set priorities to determine who gets water when it's insufficient. But we've never fully applied it. We've applied it to some of the most junior water rights, but in droughts, even just severe droughts, let alone extreme or exceptional, we haven't applied it to those who claim the most senior rights. We haven't sorted out what those rights really are. We haven't actually applied the water rights system. Also, we have pretty good laws as a foundation to protect water for the environment, but it's only been applied sparingly in a few areas. In most of the state, the fish basically get what's left over after agricultural and municipal and industrial diversions take what they need. And there's, of course, a lot left over in flood years, but in the driest years, the other diversions are making use of every drop, so that the greatest loss of water during drought is to the environmental uses. They are the ones hardest hit in the drought. And we haven't proceeded adequately to to address those needs. The third problem is we haven't managed our groundwater. What areas have done, both municipal and irrigation uses, in response to water short years when they are cut off, they're curtailed, or there simply isn't any water in the river for them to divert, is they switch to groundwater. The problem is the amount diverted in dry years isn't made up in wetter years. We have overdrafted to an average of about 1 million acre feet a year, an acre foot being about 326,000 gallons. In fact, in areas with clay soils, the withdrawal of groundwater can causes the compaction of the soil, and the decline in the levels of the earth in the San Joaquin Valley is the greatest change in the Earth's surface in the world in the history of the human race. That there have been declines of 9 meters and more in some areas from groundwater overdraft. The fourth thing we haven't dealt with is the needs for disadvantaged communities, especially in some of our rural areas. Basically, racial segregation prevented some of the farm workers from living in the cities. They established their own communities and their own systems. The problems are that they've been relatively small areas that don't have the economies of scale to provide water supply that you do in the larger systems. And they don't have the ratepayer base to have a good system. And they are often the hardest hit in the drought, because in the groundwater levels go down as everybody switches to groundwater. The big agricultural pumps can sink deeper and get new wells, and the shallower wells for the disadvantaged small communities lose their water supply. There are also water contamination issues as the deeper wells pull contaminated groundwater from near surface layers into the area. And also compaction actually can cause increases in arsenic. So you get an increased pollution as well as reduced supply. What we have done in response to the drought includes emergency orders to actually implement the water rights systems or curtailments, exceptions allowing diversions for public health and safety. In some cases, emergency protection for flows for fish, but also in some cases, relaxing environmental flows, because sometimes there are competing needs for different environmental standards for the same water, and we have to relax one to meet the other. In the long term, we've got to address these problems, not just through emergency response, but through fundamental change in how we operate the system. Ironically, our evaluation of the previous drought is we need to be more proactive. But by the time the report was out, it was way too late to be proactive. We were reactive to the next drought. We have, in fact, enacted groundwater management legislation, but that was not until 2014. There's a 20-year period to implement the plans. We don't yet know whether the plans are adequate. They're just now due. That response will require curtailment of pumping, and fairly substantial agricultural acreage will have to be taken out of production to meet the groundwater requirements. We need to start setting environmental flows, so we're not just reactive in that area. And we've enacted a program to deal with the needs of disadvantaged communities. Grant funds for capital have been available all along, but the smaller communities lack the technical ability to access it. And we now finally have a fund for operation and maintenance. In the meantime, some of our response is emergency water supply, but we're also working on providing assistance to the disadvantaged communities. Some of them can be resolved by consolidation with the nearby larger water systems, maybe a third or more, but others are too isolated, and we need other things, including funding sources. And means of providing through administrators or receivers the necessary technical, financial, and managerial support.